Did you know that you can receive and export telemetry data, so logs, traces, and metrics, from an AWS Lambda using the OpenTelemetry collector just by adding a simple layer? Let me explain. Yes, AWS already provides telemetry data for Lambdas, but it's not the most straightforward to configure and send to third parties. So AWS used this technique to observe Lambdas, which runs a stripped-down version of the OpenTelemetry collector, also known as the AWS Distro for OpenTelemetry in AWS Land, alongside the execution of your function as a layer to decouple the processing. It does this so it can receive data instantly and send it later. This means you get faster execution and you're not paying for extra compute. Perfect for short-lived processes. Let's see how it works. This is a basic Lambda function with an API gateway trigger, and when you visit the URL, you get the text subscribe to BetaStack, which you should totally do. Let's scroll down from here and click on Add a Layer, specified by ARN, and we're going to use the Lambda layer for JavaScript, but of course other languages are supported. We'll grab this ARN, we'll change the region, and we'll change the architecture, and then hit Add. Next, we'll create a new file called collector YAML, and we'll give it an OpenTelemetry collector config, which receives trace and metrics via OTLP and exports the traces to AWS X-Ray and the metrics to the console. If you're interested, here is a full list of the components that the stripped-down collector supports. Now let's add some environment variables to our project. The first one will be the URI to the OpenTelemetry config, and the second one is the location of a wrapper script that will run before our function to automatically collect telemetry data. And finally, let's turn on X-ray traces. Now if we deploy and test our function, then open the CloudWatch logs, we can see it launches OTel Lambda, sets up the collector using our config file, sets up the metrics and traces, then tells us everything is running, which is similar to the logs we see if we run the OpenTelemetry collector in Docker. Then after it runs our function, it shuts down the collector and closes it. This is really cool for doing minimal setup, but we can see we have an error in our execution because we used too much memory. This is because the collector adds more processes to our function and therefore uses more resources. So let's double our memory, and if we run the tests again, it should run correctly, which means we should get some trace data from our application. Even though Lambda layers are great for traces and metrics, if you have experience configuring the OpenTelemetry collector, you can use it for logs as well. Here is a completely different function that's using the OpenTelemetry logs SDK for Node to trigger some logs when the function is run. Be aware that the maximum zipped file size of a Lambda should be 50 megabytes. This also includes the size of all your layers, which really impacts the limit of packages you can download, especially if you want to use the full power of the Node SDK from OpenTelemetry. This function sends the logs to the collector via OTLP, and it grabs the logs and prints it to the console. So if we view our logs, we can see it's starting up the collector. If we keep scrolling down, we'll get to our first log message, which is here. And if we scroll down even more, we'll get to our second log message, which is here. And we can see we're just built for 387 milliseconds. I mean, you can see the potential when it comes to managing things like logs, metrics, and traces all in one configuration file. And because we have access to the HTTP exporter, it should be possible to send telemetry data to third parties like BetaStack. But be aware, these components are still in development, so you may get the odd issue that doesn't have much documentation about it. But nevertheless, this is a great start, and I really hope it paves the way for other cloud providers to use OpenTelemetry in their products.